So when your ESD goes out to try to raise your tax cap possibly, or search for a sales tax levy, you might be entering a new world. Our presenter tonight is a veteran of 30 successful ESD elections. He's here to share that experience. He's usually behind the cameras punching this thing out, but he's here tonight to talk about his experience on ESD elections and to share the knowledge with you that it takes to win your ESD election. That's the name of the, well, you changed the name to Successful ESD Elections instead of winning your ESD election.
Yes, I did.
That's a little curveball that you threw me right there. Anyway, Cliff Avery is here from GCP Association Services in that role tonight. He is, I do have to confess, a distant relation. We're somehow related in some way.
About a foot and a half.
Yeah. So Cliff, go ahead and take it away. I'll interject as necessary.
That's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
That's really what I'm afraid of.
Don't worry about it. It'll be fine.
Thank you, Clay. Thank you. I do have to start out with a disclaimer tonight. As many of you know, GCP Association Services provides services to various statewide associations across the state. And we happen to be employed by SafeD to do day-to-day management and operations of SafeD. And I have the honor to be the executive director of SafeD. I'm not appearing here tonight in that capacity. There have been several, as Clay mentioned, several ESDs that have hired GCP Association Services to help with their education campaign around an election. That being said, though, I want to emphasize that that does not diminish our ability or put any requirements on you to avoid coming to SafeD and asking for advice. We are here for you at SafeD, and we will give you all the advice we can. If we don't know an answer, we'll find an attorney who does. We are not attorneys at SafeD, but we do want to. We do try to give you the best guidance we can to help you have a successful election without having to hire anybody. Having said that, let me now go ahead and go on and talk about ESD elections. As Clay mentioned, many people have never had an ESD election while they've served on an ESD board. They may have been created as a rural fire prevention district back in the 60s, and they may have been converted back in 2003 to an ESD. They've never felt the need to go to the voters and ask for it to go above the ceiling of 3 cents that was in the old RFPDs. They may never have had the need to go to sales tax. So that may be a lost art in your ESD. And when you go back to start asking folks for to vote on things, these are steps that can help you be successful in the effort that you're making. I want to go to the slides now. There are many types of ESD elections, although many people haven't used them. They're commissioner elections, and I want to emphasize we're not talking about commissioner elections in this particular presentation. Those are candidate elections, and that's the success of that is really up to the candidate himself or herself.
You're on your own. Basically,
yeah. Yes, right. And but on many other elections, the ESD has taken a position, but has called the election to address needs or situations that are in the district. Creation is not normally an ESD. Obviously, the ESD is already created, so there's no reason to have a creation election. Although after 2011 law, people are dipping their toes in the creation of overlay districts that overlay existing ESDs and that provide separate services, but may have the same ESD board. That's pretty tricky, and it's a tough concept for average voters to understand, but it can be done. I've worked on one overlay election, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Annexation elections. Annexation elections are pretty easy, actually, I think, because basically an area that wants to be annexed has to vote, and the area that exists already in the ESD has to vote. And both of those probably have real strong incentives to make that annexation happen, and so it becomes a good good way for the ESD to reach out to voters. Tax cap election, as I mentioned, rural fire prevention districts, when they were created, they had a tax cap of 3 cents. So they may have gone to that 3-cent cap when they were converted in 2003. The legislature said that they could go back to voters and go above that 3 cents and go up to the constitutional maximum that ESDs have if they went to the voters and got an approval from the voters. And tax cap elections are somewhat tricky because basically you're talking property tax, and people are very sensitive about property tax. Bond issue is something that some ESDs I've actually worked on a couple of bond elections for ESDs, and that's very rare because, as you know, that 10-cent cap that's in the Constitution for our ad valorem rate does not differentiate between interest and sinking and operation and maintenance. So basically, any interest and sinking rate will have to come out of that 10-cent cap, which a lot of people are already hurting with. So that leaves sales tax, and there have been a lot of different sales tax elections. And why has sales tax become so popular for ESDs? Well, in 2007, special legislation was created, passed, and put into Chapter 775 that allowed ESDs to carve out areas that were already at the state maximum. Under state law, the maximum sales tax that can be collected anywhere in the state is 8.25%. 6.25% goes to the state of Texas. So anywhere you buy a taxable item in the state of Texas, you'll pay 6.25%. There's 2% that's left for local jurisdictions, and that's really a jump ball. The first person that gets that, the first entity that gets that portion of the sales tax is the person or the entity that keeps that. Previously, before the 2007 law, the ESD could not go after any sales tax if there was some portion of its district that was already at the maximum. In this example that's on your screen, the orange area is the ESD. There's a municipality that's within the ESD that's already at the 8.25%. And so before the 2007 legislation, the ESD could not go after any sales tax. With the legislation in 2007, the ESD could carve out that portion of its district that was already at the maximum and go out and get the remaining sales tax available to local jurisdictions. That worked really great, but it also sets up a conflict that a lot of ESDs are having to deal with, and that's when the the municipality wants to annex out into the ESD area that's already at the sales tax maximum. So in this instance, the municipality, which is 8.25%, wants to annex out in the square there that has already has a 2% ESD sales tax. So the city can't get any sales tax out of there. And if you go and look at that, that becomes a problem, and city council people get really upset about that because they're relying on that sales tax for a big portion of their budget, and they also might be relying on it for some pet projects, such as building water slides as in the name of economic development. I'm sorry, that's a kind of an inside joke, but they rely on sales tax. Cities, if you look at city budgets, it is amazing how much they rely on sales tax to fund their budget, so this sets up a conflict between the city and the ESD. Fortunately, we have a law that allows the ESD and the city to come to an agreement to share sales tax, so you can minimize that conflict. You may not eliminate it completely, but you may minimize it, and that allows the comptroller to separate out the checks, rather than having the ESD write a check to the city write a check to the ESD. The comptroller can kind of write herd on that area once there's an agreement in place. And getting that agreement, I think, is very important, and certainly something to explore for if you're looking at a sales tax. There used to be, if you had a carve out and you carved out the area that was 8 1/4, then you had to have multiple elections. In this example, there's a city that 8 1/4%. There's a city that's 7 1/4%, and the ESD at 6 1/4. Now the ESD could go out and carve out the area that was 8 1/4, and then ask for a penny sales tax. That would bring the area of the second city up to 8 1/4. Then the ESD would have another sales tax election to get another 1% in the remainder, the orange area of this ESD. Well, there's a new law that was passed in the last legislature, Senate Bill 1727, which changed that approach, and it's very new. It will have some far-reaching ramifications. One thing but we don't know what those are going to be, because there's no case law on that. There's no Attorney General opinions, and so that's something you really need to, as you go forward with a sales tax election, something that you need to talk to your attorney about. And if you don't have an attorney, get one, as Eddie Childs used to say, although he was talking about oil wells. But anyway, under the new law, what would happen in this case is that the ESD would have one election and say that it's going to go for 2%, and everywhere that it could in the district. And under the new law, everybody gets to vote. Under the old law, back here, when you did the carve out, the city didn't vote on it. The city was out of the election, and only the people that were in the area voted on the sales tax, in the area that was going to be collecting the sales tax. Under the new law, the city votes, and both cities in this instance would vote. One would vote for a 1% increase. One would not see any increase, but still get to vote on whether or not the ESD could collect sales tax outside the area of the city. This could be very problematic, and it's something that kind of worry about, because there may be some city council people that really do not want the ESD to have a sales tax. It could be okay, though. It could work both different ways. I had a ESD election last spring where there was a city inside the ESD. This was in Bexar County, and they really wanted the sales tax because they knew that ESD really needed the money. And they were very disappointed that they couldn't go vote for the sales tax, even though they were already at the maximum. And so it can work both ways, and it's going to require a very delicate touch, I think, as you go into your sales tax election, and you need to start doing following the steps that I'm going to be talking about And one of the first steps that we're going to talk about in just a minute is building relationships. This shows how this chart is courtesy of Sales Tax Assurance, a company that assures or monitors sales tax for local jurisdictions. And it shows how ESDs have grown in the number of dollars that they've received from sales taxes. If you look also, you'll see there's two different subcharts in there. One is the entities with a sales tax and ESDs with a sales tax. There are 84 ESDs with a sales tax, but there are 99 entities. And the reason there's a difference is, as we said about the limited carve-out, they may have gotten an ESD. An ESD may have gotten a 1% in one part of its ESD, then carved out an area that was already at the max and had another half cent available. So as a result, there are two different entities for the same ESD that are, from the comptroller's point of view, that are collecting tax. And this shows the different rates of taxes that that ESDs collect. Most of them are in the 1% range there. I talked about building relationships, and there are a lot of relationships you need to build before you even start thinking about the sales tax, or as soon as you start thinking about the sales tax. The first relationship that I think is very important is you need to go talk to the comptroller and get an estimate about how much sales tax you can reasonably expect to earn or collect in your district. You know, if you're only going to collect $10,000 in sales tax, it doesn't make sense to have a $14,000 election. So that's an important thing to do, and you certainly need to, for not only the comptroller but also for the county, because you're going to be talking to the county about conducting the election in all likelihood. You need to have a good map so that you can take a map to the comptroller and you can take a map to the county and say, this is my district and this is these are going to be the voters that I'm going to be talking to. I think one thing I want to leave everybody very clear on is that when you conduct an election and you send out mailings or whatever, you need to be talking to the registered voters in the ESD. It doesn't make sense to talk to the property owners. Although they write the checks, they are not going to be deciding the outcome of the election because they are not registered to vote. If they are registered to vote and they own property, great, love them to death. But let's talk to the registered voters, because those are the people that are going to be able to determine the outcome of your election. Also talk to the county election people when you're building this relationship. Talk to them first, because as Clay mentioned when we started the webcast tonight, it may be years and years since they had an election, even thought about an election, and they may not even know how to spell ESD at the county election office. So you need to let them know that you're thinking about an election so they can begin to identify the registered voters in your district. I had a case, an election last spring. I came in fairly late into the election. The county did not know what the boundaries were. The county election people did not know the boundaries of the ESD. And we were trying to get a mailing out to invite people to a town hall meeting. And this very nice lady who was completely swamped in a small East Texas county said, I'm not going to be able to have that for you until after that meeting occurs, because I'm going down every street trying to figure out who's in your district and who's not. We ended up having to go, for that first mailing, we had to go to the and use a school district voter list that was roughly contiguous. But the sooner you talk to your county and talk to them about what you're going to be doing, the better off you're going to be. You can also need to build relationships with your community. You can do this with open houses and Fire Prevention Week, Heart Month in February, I believe, with press releases to the local media. People need to begin to make that connection between the ESD and the services you provide, because you and we think about ESDs every day. We think about, we know what an ESD does, we know what it can do, what it can't do, but for most people, they don't know from ESD. And they certainly don't know that you're the one that's responsible for fire protection or emergency medical first response, or EMS completely. And they may think that the big city does it, they may think that the county does it, but when they walk into the election will say for or against Buffalo County ESD number 99. It's going to say whatever the name of the district is. And if they aren't able to make that connection and go, oh yeah, those are the nice people that put out my fire, or those are the nice people that got my husband's out of to the hospital with his heart attack. If they can't make that connection, it's going to be tough when they start knee-jerking and seeing the word tax. This is an annual report that one ESD did for a while, and it's good to keep that conversation going even when you're not having an election. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Social media becoming more and more prominent. We've used social media. Facebook is very good. I'm not a big fan of Twitter, I got to say, and but Facebook, I think you can reach a lot of people. You need to plan ahead if you're going to have an election. There's one thing that SAFE-D always stresses is having a strategic plan for your ESD. Look 3 to 5 years out where you want to go and try to figure out how you're going to get there. This is like doing your homework, and if you've done your homework and you walk into people and say, I need this sales tax for X, Y, or Z, whatever it is, I need this sales tax, and they say, what do you want it for? And you can say, well, we've identified these needs over the next 3 to 5 years. Then you're going to be a lot better than oh well, we just thought we might need it sometime. It's like having a kid. No, I'm sorry, Clay.
It's okay.
It's like having a kid who walks in and says, I need $20, and the first thing you're going to ask is, what do you need it for? And it's the same way with your voters. They're going to ask, what do you need it for? You need to do hard numbers that show where your revenues are coming for, what your expenses are going to be. And I absolutely insist that if at all possible, that there is a written strategic plan that shows that people you can show on your website, you can show at your town hall meetings, this is one we wrote for South Hays Fire Department, Hays County ESD number 3. And this is a really good one. I did not write this, but and it's still available on this kind of link that's out there. But this was Wilson County ESD number 2. I thought they did an extraordinarily good job of identifying. They're an EMS ESD. They did demographics that included age, what diseases were prone, or what diseases affected the ages of their citizenry, and it was very detailed. And I think people read that and they were impressed, and they realized that they were not. This was not any fly-by-night operation. I always like to have people come to a town hall meeting at the beginning, sometimes even before the election is called. In fact, preferably before the election is called, because at that point people kind of feel like they still have a way to impact the decision you're going to make when you call the election. This is a sample of one of the invitations that went out. It was a 4-page, full color. It went out to all registered voters. It went out pre-sorted first class to make sure that it got there in time, and so that people knew that their input was welcome. There are 3 reasons to do this. One, you can begin to drive the narrative behind your election. You can tell them, this is why I need this because, well, as in this headline here, because we face more calls. We have growth. We're struggling to keep up with the growth. It may be because you're losing people to the big city next door, and so you need to increase the competitiveness of your salaries. Whatever the reason, you can begin to bring that message out and get that to the folks and let them know why you've called the election. The second thing that's good for is it prevents people from saying right at the end of the election cycle, from saying, hey, you never told me you were doing this. Well, yes, we did. We sent emails. We sent our mail to the registered voter list. We had a town hall meeting. In fact, many have multiple town hall meetings because they need to address different areas of their district, and that cuts the legs off that argument. I had one ESD down in Harris County that they'd lost twice before they hired me, and one of the reasons they lost the time before was that there was a Tea Party person who was robocalling all the registered voters and saying they're hiding the ball, they're trying to do this in secret, they're taking your money while you're asleep at night. I mean, it was really bad. Well, the same script ran after we'd done our town hall meetings, and it had no impact because people could see, wait a second, they invited me to this town hall meeting. They're telling me about this. It's not secret. And so that guy, they won that election. And I think that having an open town hall meeting environment was one of the reasons. The third reason for having a town hall meeting is to prevent or to hear what the citizens against virtually everything are going to say. As many people have heard me call those folks, they're cave people, the citizens against virtually everything. The cave people that they're going to come out and they're going to talk to you and tell you exactly why they don't want this. You are not going to win an election with 100% of the vote. Just put that aside. All you really need to win an election is 50% plus 1. And I've won a couple elections with 50% plus 7. But hearing what the negative people are going to say about your proposition is important. In many cases, they vent and then they kind of wander off into the night. And in fact, in one case, we actually turned one very prominent opponent because he was a newspaper editor and had a little weekly newspaper newspaper, and was also a fireworks stand operator. And so we're going to have our town hall meeting. He couldn't make it, so he sent his mother to monitor it. And at the end of the meeting, his mother came up to the executive director of the EMS organization and said, wow, this sounds like it really needs to happen. So we were pretty pleased about that. So I'd like to have the town hall meetings, and it gets things out in the open. Nobody's hiding the ball. You know what what you need to say to the folks. You need to watch out for the money. As I mentioned, you need to be able to show what the revenues will be and where those revenues will go. This is one of the questions I get asked a lot. If you're an ESD, you cannot electioneer. And somewhere on the page, the page where you are now looking, there's a link to a brochure from the Texas Ethics Commission that has guidance for local jurisdictions about what you can and cannot do. You cannot spend public money to advocate the one way or the other for an election. That's the basic thing. There's some arcane things, rules that TEC has, but generally it's as long as you tell the truth and don't go crazy about it and start saying stuff like, if this election fails, more children will die or something on that order, then you're not going to electioneer. You are presenting the facts that affect emergency services in your constituency. I'm sure we might have some more questions about this.
You can't say vote for this or vote.
Absolutely cannot say. The ESD cannot say that. The ESD commissioner, if you run into somebody at the grocery store, you can say, you know, I really hope this passes. I hope you vote for it, because you as an ESD commissioner have First Amendment rights that allow you to say that. But you can't use ESD money to put that message out. There are other ways to make sure that there's a message, though, an advocacy. Sometimes the firefighter union will do it. Sometimes the VFD may be able to campaign in favor or against whatever way they need to go. You need to the VFD needs to check with its attorney and its creation documents to make sure it's what kind of 501c organization it is, a nonprofit organization. Some organizations are prevented from doing electioneering also. One thing I always say is firefighters should not go and door to door in uniform. They can go in their union shirt, they can go in their VFD shirt, but they shouldn't go in uniform that the ESD paid for. We need to find ways to keep people informed. This is a brochure, a Q&A that we've sent out for a number of different elections that goes out right before early voting. It's very important that they have that information when early voting starts, because roughly usually about half your vote will come during early voting, about the 2 weeks before before the election day. By the way, there are only 2 election days that you can have, and that is Saturday, the first Saturday in May, and the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Those are the only available election dates for an ESD.
And if you do it in May of even-numbered years, you're not going to be able to piggyback off the county election.
Right.
You're going to actually have to host the election yourself by probably, right?
Right. And if you're trying for an overlay election, that's an that's a county election. So you
all
can't
overlays and creation elections, overlay or any sort of creation election for an ESD is a county election. Counties are not allowed to hold elections on the May uniform election date of even-numbered years because of the primaries in Senate Bill 100 a few years ago. I think it was
13, maybe.
It was, I want to say 11 or 13, yeah. But anyway, counties can't hold elections on uniform election date in that first Saturday in May. First Saturday in May?
Yeah, but they can contract to conduct an election and they have the opportunity. They have the ability to say no. If they think they can do it, they can. But
right.
if they don't have.
But they can't hold a county election. They
right.
can't hold an election for themselves, which creation elections are by definition a county election. You can contract with the county, but they can say no, and so that could leave you.
This is going on the highlights. Really.
Having to foot the bill. Yes, absolutely. It's all a highlight.
Absolutely.
All right. Sorry.
Okay, let's go on back to that. So again, get that information out before early voting, because you're going to have a lot of people voting. Stay on message. Once you've identified what the needs of the ESD are, then it's really an elevator pitch. We need to have additional resources so that we can deal with growth. we need to have additional resources because we need to upgrade our equipment, upgrade our SCBAs, increase firefighter protection. All of those are very valuable messages, but you need to determine what that message is for your ESD and stay on it. I had one election, one of the first elections I ever did. There was this horrible letter that went into the local newspaper calling the ESD commissioners crooks and all sorts of bad, horrible things. And the first thing I did, first thing that happened was that the president of the ESD board called me and said, we've got to get a letter out and say that we are not at any of those things, and that guy's even worse than we are. And I said, no, you don't want to do that, because one, it just amplifies what he said, so that and people will see that and go, oh, I need to go back and read that in yesterday's paper. And it takes you off message. You need to stay on message. This is what you need these resources for. You need to find your allies where you can spread that message. We include this announcement in all the invitations for the town hall meetings. We want to reach out to property owner associations, clubs, churches, civic organizations. So, we'll go talk to anybody if they're willing to listen. This is one of the most important things, is getting people to the polls, and this, no one can argue that it's important, if you're going to call an election, that you need to get people to the polls. That is a legitimate exercise of your governmental power. And this is one of the, we just send out a postcard, or normally we just send a postcard right before election day reminding them to vote. So, Clay and I just sat there and talked about all the vagaries of elections. Most people don't know that, and don't have to know that. God love them. And so they need to be reminded that it's time to go to the polls. There was one election that we didn't send this out. We thought, oh, we're doing really good. We don't need to really take on that expense. And we won early voting, but we lost election day, and we lost the election. And so I am a firm believer that that postcards of some kind go out to remind people to get to the polls. And then to keep building relationships. And this is more important now than ever before. If you followed the legislature last spring, you know that we came very close, last summer, we came very close to having to have an election automatically every time that you went over a 4% increase in your effective tax rate. And the legislature really, really wants to clamp down on local governments and the decision making that local governments make that might actually increase property taxes. And so there may be this even coming up again in the next legislative session. We're certainly, from a SAFE-D standpoint, we're going to try and minimize the impact on ESDs. SAFE-D was very involved. John Carlton was very involved in cutting ESDs out of the mix as small jurisdictions. But you never know what's going to come out of the legislature, especially now that we're having a significant leadership change in the House. As I said in my column at the newsletter, now is the time to talk to your voters, get them used to the idea that the ESD is responsible for fire protection, emergency medical response, and make that connection, and keep making that connection, because you never know what's going to be happening after the 2019 session. There's my 10 steps. This PowerPoint is in the on the page that where you're watching, so you can download that. And so now we can start singing Christmas carols, and this is the GCP Christmas party.
Yep.
So no,
Nope.
no, okay.
Okay, let's get to questions. I do want to reiterate one thing that we can say for sure. This is the rollback election, reducing the mandatory elections for if your effective rate, your revenues exceed 4%. That whole thing is coming back in 2019. Whether it passes or not, but it is coming back at some point in 2019, and it will be important to keep an eye out for that. But that's a matter for a legislative webcast, not for this.
Yes.
Let me go ahead and real quick go back to how to ask questions, if we can get that slide up. 512-251-8101 is how you can call me here. You can email here at safed@texas.net. You can text me right here in the studio. We've already got one, 512-567-0857. Normal text messaging rates apply. Please don't call that number. I cannot answer it live on air. And you can even fax to 512-251-8152. I'm just telling Cliff to turn his volume off on his iPad. Might as well just not hide the ball from the good people here. So let's dive right into the questions.
The end of the year.
Yeah, it's the holidays. They'll forgive us for that. We did have an email question in, and I'm actually going to pull out the computer so I can read it because it was kind of lengthy, and I want to make sure and get it all in there. This one's from Henderson County, I believe. It's a three-hole questions. What is the definition of a political subdivision? Can you please describe what one is and offer an example of a couple of them? You want to take that one, or?
Sure.
We had a list.
We looked it up on in statute, and it's pretty much local governmental units such as counties, municipalities, road districts, ESDs.
ESDs are political subdivisions of the state of Texas.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that aren't political subdivisions. Volunteer fire departments aren't political subdivisions. SAFE-D or any association is not a political subdivision of the state. The Firefighters Union is not a political subdivision of the state. You, as your incorporate human body, are not a political subdivision of the state. At least I don't think a human being could be a political subdivision. So there's a lot of things that aren't a political subdivision, but counties, cities, ESD, school districts, road and bridge districts, crime prevention districts. Those are political subdivisions.
Yeah, one guide is in governmental code section 2254.021. If you want to go look that up.
If you want to deep dive in the government code, but the important part for our purposes are ESDs are political subdivisions of the state of Texas.
Volunteer fire departments are not.
VFDs are not, and any sort of private agency is not.
Right.
Second question: what are the requirements of a person who signs a petition to call for a sales tax election for an ESD? For their signature to be validated on the petition for a county election clerk.
If I may.
You may.
The first thing to remember is that you do not have to have a petition to call a sales tax election. You have to have a petition to do a creation election, but you do not have to have a petition for a sales tax election. That can be done with a 3-2 vote by your Board of Commissioners for the ESD. You can... A petition can come forward for that, and that has to be. Let
me go ahead and give the statute site just in case you want. If you're curious about sales and use tax election procedures for ESDs, the statute is Health and Safety Code 775. Hopefully, you have a quick access to that. Health and Safety Code Chapter 775, which is the ESD statute. It's 775.0752 is the sales and use tax election procedures, and that says. An election can be called by the adoption of a resolution by the board. So all you need is 3 of your ESD commissioners or a majority of, you just need to adopt a resolution and you can call a sales tax election. However, it says that the board shall call an election if a number of qualified voters, hold on to that term for a second, of the district, qualified voters of the district equal to at least 5%
of the number of registered voters in the district petitions the board to call for elections. So your citizens can petition the board, and the board shall call an election. It's a shall, so the board has to do it. If you get 5% of the registered voters of the district, and the 5% has to be made up in answer to this question from Henderson County, the 5% has to be made up of qualified voters. Now, we talk 5%. Now we talk, qualified voters is a term that shows up a lot in 775. It shows up all over the Texas statutes, really. So real quickly, I'll run down what a qualified voter is, because that's, I think, what question 2 here from our friend in Henderson County is. Citing the election code, a qualified voter, there's basically 6 things that you have to have. You got to be 18. You have to be a U.S. citizen. You have to be a resident of the state of Texas. Can't be from, can't be living in California or somewhere else. You have to be a registered voter. And the other 2, there are some exceptions. You can't have been declared mentally incapacitated by a court. And there's some statute or language around that. And you also can't be finally convicted of a felony. And there's some exception to that in Chapter 11 of the Election Code. So that's where you go for a qualified voter. But those are the 6 things to be a qualified voter. Owning real taxable property is not a requirement for this part of being a qualified voter. You see that when you're talking about a creation petition. It has to be 100 qualified voters, which means you have to have those 6 things, who own real taxable property. That's when we're talking about creating an ESD. That's where you have to have 100 qualified voters, and the statute actually says who own real taxable property in the district. So you have to have those 6 things plus that. There's no who owns real taxable property in the part about sales tax. So my understanding is they don't have to own real taxable property. They just have to be a qualified voter in the district. They do have to be in the district. So
and this would be a time to actually throw in a disclaimer that neither Clay nor I are practicing attorneys.
We are not ESD attorneys. We are not your attorney. None of this is legal advice. Please consult your own ESD attorney who is knowledgeable about ESD election issues and all ESD legal issues before taking any of this advice as legal advice.
This is a layman's reading of the statutes,
Exactly.
and there are things such as court cases, AG opinions, all that stuff that can affect other opinions.
I think I'm pretty close, but it's not legal advice. And third portion of this question from Henderson County. What is the minimum required percentage of, we covered this, great. What is the minimum required percentage of registered voters' signature within an ESD's boundaries? 5%. 5%. But again, you don't need the petition. The petition is a way to force the ESD board to call an election, but the ESD board can call an election itself. And by a resolution, by adopting a resolution.
Sales tax election.
Sales tax election. Excuse me. I'm just focused on the sales tax because that's what the question was about. Yeah. So that's kind of answered. We got through those. Through those.
Thanks, Henderson County.
Yeah, I think these are also from Henderson County.
Okay.
I think Henderson County might be looking at an election. Okay, so this is an electioneering question.
Good luck.
So ESD money can't pay for newspaper ads for sales tax or mailers. They can. Go ahead.
They cannot if those ads or mailers advocate the outcome of an election. They can if they are informing the citizens about the issues related to the election.
So you can't spend ESD money to buy a newspaper ad that says go out and vote for the sales tax. We really, no. you have to. We want you to vote for this sales tax. You can place an ad in a newspaper, theoretically, that says information that explains why the ESD is calling it, saying what the ESD is going to use it for. I'm looking at you because I want to make sure I'm not saying something wrong.
No, absolutely. You can do that. Better, I think, to spend advertising money to advertise people and invite people to the town hall meeting where you can discuss it more fully.
Remember, you as an ESD are an information resource during these elections. You're an open, transparent information about what's going on, what you're going to use the money for, why this election is being called, but you can't say vote for it. Yeah. Sort of another election question coming from Harris County ESD 13. Hello to Sarah and our good friends there. They are regular watchers of the Monday webcast. Can you talk more about what commissioners and firefighters can and cannot do regarding the ethics? And there's a whole thing, and I invite you to go to that link to the Ethics Commission brochure that we put underneath.
It should be right below.
Well, some people full screen their
oh yeah,
their when they're watching the webcast, but it is on the link on the landing page when you click the link to go to the webcast. So there's a link to that.
If you can't see the link, send us an email. We'll shoot you the link.
We'll get it to you. Yeah. Again, it's basically when electioneering, wouldn't you say, comes down to you cannot ask for the voting. You cannot ask for the outcome of the election. You cannot try to influence the outcome of the election
one way or the other.
One way or the other. You cannot direct people to vote a certain way. Now, when it's your firefighters, and correct me,
certainly if your firefighters go out in the community and they happen to be at the Subway shop or whatever, and start talking about, hey, we really need this to pass, that's okay. Because not if they're in uniform, have them not talk about it in uniform, but if they're with their family on a Sunday afternoon, and they certainly have the ability to talk to people and say, you know, we really hope that this passes because this is important for our safety and for your safety, or something on that order. ESD commissioners can do the same thing. In that pamphlet, there's actually a little paragraph that you can still go out and you can even spend your own money. After you spend $500, then you have to do. You basically have to become a PAC, but you can even spend your own money to influence the outcome of the election. I wouldn't spend it if you're getting a per diem, but very few ESDs get the per diem. So you know, basically it's just kind of common sense. Don't use resources or ESD money to advocate one way or the other about the election.
And that comes into a service provider like a VFD. If you're an independent contractor, the VFD could technically put something out.
Right.
But then again, if the VFD is getting all its money from the ESD, there may be an issue there. So you want to be really, really careful.
Yeah, it's a common sense smell test kind of thing. If it looks like
ESD money can't be paying for things that say vote yes, basically.
Right. If you got an ESD fund that comes from a barbecue or from subscriptions or whatever,
VFD fund.
A VFD fund, yeah. Then you should be able to. You could use that for advocacy if that fits into the way your nonprofit status is. That's a whole nother ball of.
If the firefighters work for the ESD, if the ESD is the service provider, then you've got a real problem because you cannot have. You've got to really watch it because they're employees of the ESD and they're using ESD money. That's why Cliff says don't go out there in your firefighting uniform that the ESD paid for, because that could be seen as an endorsement of what, you know, if that firefighter then says vote yes, here's a pamphlet, then you've got a problem that he did it with his, you know, badge or uniform saying such and such county ESD on it.
Yeah, it's something to be careful of, and remember that if you get into a big snag over that, then that takes you off message. It's more important to stay on message and to get the information out about that message rather than trying to brute force it and advocate.
Okay, so we are pretty close to the end here. I kind of wanted to double back to some SB 1727 issues with the carve out to try to kind of explain it real quick. Can we go back in the slides to that?
Sure. Right there.
Okay, so that's the situation that SB 1727 was designed to remedy, right? So the important thing I think to remember, and again, this is all brand new, and we are not ESD attorneys, but if you understand that SB 1727 basically did away with the idea of a carve out per se. There is no carve out as far as that kind of stuff goes.
There's no carve out for election purposes.
Right.
You're
There's not a
carving out-
specific carve out. Basically, what 1727 is supposed to say is, in this instance that you see on your screen, the ESD can go out and simply say, we can have an election for, and I'm going to read the 1727 language. The ballot language for 1727 is, at an election described by the section that it does, the ballot shall be prepared to prevent voting for or against the proposition. The adoption of a local sales and use tax in name of district at a rate not to exceed proposed tax rate % in any location in the district. And that's the important part is, now in this situation that you see on your screen, you can go out and say, in your district at a rate not to exceed 2% at any location, and then you can get that 7.25 as well, up to, you can get that 1% that you have available in the grayish city up there in the left-hand corner. And you can do it all in one fell swoop. The trick is 1727, SB 1727 knocked out. It used to say you could go for sales tax in this carve-out scenario if you excluded from the election and the applicability of the proposed sales tax any territory that's an 8.25%. Well, under this new sort of way of thinking, there's you can't really do that. You can't knock out a specific area anymore
from the election
because you're voting in the entire district. The ballot language covers the entire district, so you can't then go, okay, well, we want to take the 8.25% city out, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a new world, and that's one of the reasons. And we're not going to belabor it too much because again, it's brand new and. It may change in 2 years, and we don't want to.
Yeah,
we don't want to spend too much time on it.
It's something definitely to discuss with your attorney before you go into a sales tax election.
Right, and it could be it could be a problem if you're. Can you back up one slide to the annexation slide? It could be a problem in this instance where that city that's at 8.25% sees you going for this and says, well, even though usually under the old rules, that city would be exempt from voting, but that city could then try to block you.
Exempt is an interesting word. Yeah.
It was carved out of the vote, so those citizens couldn't vote. Now they'll be able to vote, and the city council, who maybe says, well, we want to annex that area someday, and we don't want the ESD to already have that sales tax. Well, we're going to go ahead and campaign against this sales tax and try to get our citizens to vote.
Yes.
The remedy here, if there is one, and I think there is in the transparency that Cliff talked about in his presentation, being open and communicative as possible to the citizens. And that means saying, hey, city of wherever, you're at 8.25%. And you are not affected in any way by this election because you're already paying the max. And that goes into the materials, the informational materials that you will have. I've gone over my time. I'm getting the wrap it up signal, and I'm sorry for going over. But that's a pretty important change, and it's a pretty important thing coming towards the ESD world, the death of the carve out as we knew it. So. For more information on that, give us a call. I'll try to answer your questions and explain it better than I just did because
you did great,
I appreciate that. But I think there's better ways to talk about this when I'm not on a time crunch. So anyway, that's it for us tonight, I promise. Thank you for joining us. A shameless plug before I let you get your hour. One last thing that I have to talk about is the Safety Annual Conference. Moody Gardens in Galveston, February 22nd through the 24th. We hope to see you there. Finalizing the schedule, and we'll have that out right after the first of the year. So if you have something that you desperately want to see on there, we might be able to switch something around or have an open spot. We try to build in some flexibility. So let us know, but that's going to be
pretty quick coming out right after the first of the year, and registration will be opening right after the first of the year. Wait, registration's open. Registration, yeah, we already have like 300 people, so I don't know why I said that. So we already have a lot of people coming, and we hope you're one of them.